Police in Kenya have opened fire during fresh clashes with protesters in the capital, Nairobi. Police also used whips on the protesters. Demonstrations were there and due to be held across the country to mark the anniversary of pro-democracy protests back in 1990.
It didn't begin with a vote, with the quiet deliberation of democracy, or a riot, a sudden eruption of anger contained within hours. It began with a scream, a raw, visceral expression of frustration that had been building for years. A scream that echoed through the streets of Nairobi and beyond. And a bullet. A single devastating act that would forever alter the course of a nation. A stark punctuation mark on a period of simmering discontent. This was not the Kenya of safari postcards, the land of majestic elephants and breathtaking sunsets marketed to tourists. Or tech headlines, the Silicon Savannah narrative of innovation and economic boom that often overshadowed the harsh realities on the ground. This was a nation on its knees, struggling under the weight of corruption, inequality, and broken promises. Its youth pushed to the edge, their aspirations stifled, their voices ignored. A generation facing a future bleaker than any before. Nairobi's air, once thick with hope and the promise of a brighter tomorrow, now hung heavy with despair, a palpable sense of disillusionment settling over the city. A generation raised on digital dreams, connected to the world and brimming with potential, found their futures mortgaged, their opportunities dwindling, their voices unheard. By a government they felt had betrayed them, a government perceived as out of touch and self-serving. The scream was the collective voice of millions, a unified cry for change, a primal cry against a system that seemed rigged against them, a system that demanded everything, their taxes, their loyalty, their silence, and gave nothing in return. The bullet was the state's answer, a brutal and short-sighted response. A cold attempt to silence dissent, to quell the rising tide of anger and frustration. A generation that had found its voice, a generation determined to be heard. But the shot didn't bring silence. It failed to achieve its intended effect. It ignited a fire, a spark that set ablaze the pent-up frustrations of a nation. The bullet ripped through Kenyan society, tearing at the already fragile social fabric, exposing the chasm between rulers and ruled, the stark contrast between the haves and have-nots. For Gen Z, it was a beginning, a line drawn in the sand. Silence was no longer an option. They would not be silenced. This was a story written before, a familiar narrative of oppression and resistance, but this time, the protagonists were young, energized, and unwilling to accept the status quo. Tech-savvy and united in their demand for a better future. They were children of the internet, a generation born into a world of instant communication and boundless information. Fluent in memes, hashtags, and digital mobilization, masters of online organizing and social media activism. They'd watched other movements rise and fall, learning from both their successes and their failures, and they had learned. They were strategic, organized, and determined to succeed where others had faltered. Power wasn't just in parliament, in the hands of politicians and policymakers, or guns, in the arsenal of the state. It was in their numbers, the sheer force of their collective will, their unity and control of the narrative, their ability to shape public opinion and challenge the official story. The scream and the bullet became twin symbols, potent reminders of the stakes involved. One of pain, of loss, of the human cost of oppression, one of power, of resilience, of the unwavering determination to fight for a better future. This was not just a protest against a finance bill, a specific piece of legislation. It was a rebellion against a stolen future, a rejection of a system that had failed to deliver on its promises. It was a fight for the right to exist, to thrive, to have a voice in shaping their own destiny, to dream, and to live with dignity, free from corruption, inequality, and oppression. The world was about to witness, to see firsthand what happens when a generation meant to be silent, a generation expected to accept their fate, decides to roar, to rise up and demand change. Kenya's youth were done waiting for change, for someone else to fix the problems they faced. They were becoming it, the agents of their own destiny, the leaders of a new generation. The scream and the bullet, these two events seemingly disparate, marked the start of a new chapter, a pivotal moment in Kenya's history, a turning point that would define the nation for generations to come. June 25, 2024. A day that began like any other but would soon be etched in the nation's memory. Nairobi woke to a deceptive calm. The air was still, the streets quiet, holding its breath before the storm. For days, youth had marched peacefully, their voices rising in unison, believing in protest, and in their government's willingness to listen, to heed their calls for change and reform. They believed in the power of their collective voice. That belief was shattered, like glass under a heavy blow. As thousands converged near Parliament, their numbers swelling with each passing hour, the state unleashed its fury, a calculated response meant to quell dissent. Tear gas, choking the air, stinging eyes, water cannons, blasting protesters with relentless force, and then, live ammunition. The unthinkable became reality. Police turned their weapons on unarmed citizens, on the very people they were sworn to protect. The city center became a war zone, a battleground between the people and their government. Rex Kanyiki Masai, 29, was shot and killed by police, an innocent life extinguished in the chaos. His death instantly shared across social media, a digital witness to the brutality. His name became a rallying cry, a symbol of loss and injustice, a symbol of the price of demanding accountability, of daring to challenge the status quo. Outrage spread like wildfire. Grief turned to rage, a potent and unstoppable force. Protesters breached Parliament, a symbolic act of defiance, setting parts ablaze, a desperate act born of frustration and despair, a desperate act against an institution, a symbol of power that had failed them. They felt had declared war on their future, stealing their opportunities and silencing their voices. The fire consumed more than a building, it consumed the remnants of hope. It burned away the last trust between people and leaders, leaving behind only ashes and disillusionment. By nightfall, Nairobi was scarred, both physically and emotionally. The official death toll climbed, a grim tally of lives lost, but the real number was lost in chaos, hidden beneath the surface of official reports. Hospitals overflowed with the injured, many with gunshot wounds, a testament to the brutality of the state's response. The government had chosen bullets over dialogue, violence over understanding. For Kenya's youth, there was no turning back. The Rubicon had been crossed. The day the streets bled, a stark reminder of the sacrifices made, was the day the movement was baptized in fire, forged in the crucible of conflict. It was no longer just a protest, it had become something far more profound. It was a fight for survival, a desperate struggle for their future and their dignity. The world watched with bated breath as Kenya's youth refused to be silenced, their voices echoing across the globe. June 25th became a date no one would forget, a day of reckoning, a turning point in Kenya's history. At the heart of the uprising, the spark that ignited a nation, was the 2024 Finance Bill. It wasn't just another piece of legislation, it was a catalyst for widespread discontent. On paper, cloaked in the language of economics, it appeared to be a technical policy, a series of calculated adjustments. But to Kenyans, particularly the young and the working class, it was perceived as nothing short of economic war, a direct assault on their livelihoods. New taxes on basics, bread, oil, the very staples of daily life, mobile money, the lifeblood of small transactions, threatened the already precarious survival of millions already struggling to make ends meet. It pushed them to the brink. The government, in its defense, claimed the taxes were absolutely needed to service crippling debt obligations and fund essential development projects. But the youth, increasingly politically aware and engaged, saw blatant hypocrisy. Austerity and sacrifice demanded of the masses, while luxury and privilege remained firmly entrenched for the elite. The bill, in their eyes, unfairly punished the poor and the young generations, effectively making them pay the price for the endemic corruption of their elders. Youth unemployment had already reached catastrophic levels, leaving many feeling hopeless. Even the burgeoning digital gig economy, a vital source of income for many, was now under threat from these new and burdensome taxes. The bill, therefore, became a potent symbol of a fundamentally broken social contract, a betrayal of trust. The government, detached from reality, spoke of abstract GDP figures and economic growth, but the youth, facing stark realities, spoke of basic survival, of putting food on the table. Rejecting the bill was not just about opposing a tax, it was about rejecting a future condemned to perpetual struggle and hardship. For a generation pushed to the edge, the finance bill was, undeniably, the final straw. The movement began online, not in boardrooms. #RejectFinanceBill 2024 became a digital rallying point. Leaderless by design, the movement was agile and impossible to decapitate. Early protests were met with arrests and tear gas, but defiance only grew. What started in Nairobi spread nationwide: Mombasa, Kisumu, Eldoret, Nakuru, and beyond. Organization was organic anonymous calls to action, pro bono legal and medical aid, crowdfunding for supplies. The movement cared for its own, showing unity across tribes, religions, and classes. Young people were united as Kenyans fighting for their future. Slogans in English, Swahili, and Sheng reflected a shared national consciousness. Tens of thousands mobilized without a single leader. This was a new model of activism. Digital, resilient, and deeply Kenyan. Kenya's Gen Z wielded smartphones, not stones. Memes, hashtags, and live streams became their weapons. Every act of police brutality was filmed and shared globally within minutes. They became their own journalists, documenting the struggle in real time. Protesters flooded MPs with calls, used AI to create protest art, and made their message trend worldwide. Encrypted apps coordinated movements and protected identities. They crowdsourced the identification of undercover police. Digital solidarity built a resilient, emotionally connected movement. Gen Z proved they were politically conscious, highly organized, and masters of the digital domain. Their unity online was as powerful as their presence in the streets. The government responded with brute force. Tear gas and water cannons escalated to live ammunition. Abductions and illegal detentions targeted activists. Plainclothes officers snatched young Kenyans from homes and streets. The state tried to silence the movement by making its loudest voices disappear. On protest days, the government imposed internet blackouts, trying to sever the movement's lifeline. But repression only fueled the protests. Every arrest and bullet created new martyrs and drew more to the cause. The state's violence stripped away any pretense of democracy. The crackdown turned a protest about taxes into a revolution for freedom. President Ruto, once the hustler champion, found himself isolated. The youth who once supported him now demanded his resignation. His speeches rang hollow as violence escalated. He misread the movement, dismissing protesters as misguided. After June 25th's bloodshed, he doubled down, calling protesters criminals. International condemnation followed as images of violence spread worldwide. Under pressure, Ruto reversed course. He withdrew the finance bill, but the damage was done. Trust was broken. He lost more than a bill. He lost the generation he was meant to lead. Kenya's uprising echoed Africa's long history of youth-led protest. The images recalled Soweto, 1976, youth facing bullets for their future. Like Nigeria's End SARS, Kenya's Gen Z used social media to mobilize and resist state brutality. Hashtags became global rallying cries, leaderless and decentralized. The movement learned from the Arab Spring focus on clear, achievable goals. Kenya's youth continued a legacy of resistance, fighting not just a bill, but for justice and dignity. They inherited the struggle of their parents and grandparents. Each generation finds its own tools and its own voice. As protests raged, a second battle unfolded, the fight for the narrative. Mainstream media downplayed, echoing government lines. Protesters became citizens, live streaming. Hashtags like blackout called out coverage. Internet media often missed movement's sophistication, focusing on chaos over. This media pushed protesters to tell their own story. Learned if you want your story told right, you must tell it yourself. This wasn't just a protest, it was a reckoning with power and silence. They called them rebels. History will call them the generation that refused to die quietly. This is Insight Africa, where the cry for justice is louder than fear.